I'm Amy Harrington. It's April 18th, 2011, and I'm conducting an interview with Melissa Gilbert for the Archive of American Television in Tarzana, California. To start with, so what was your name at birth?
Oh, gosh. My name at birth was Baby Girl Darlington.
Okay. And why was that?
I was born to a man named David Darlington and his wife-to-be, Kathy Wood, and they put me up for adoption right away. So it was about 24 hours later that I was officially named Melissa Gilbert.
Okay, and who adopted you?
My mother, Barbara Crane Gilbert, and my father, Paul Gilbert, adopted me when I was about 24 hours old.
And where was that?
Downtown Los Angeles. I was born at a hospital that no longer exists, but in 1964 it was called the French Hospital.
And what was the date of your birth?
May 8th, 1964 was the day that I was born. I hear it's a good day for wine. I don't know.
Interesting.
I don't know. I made that up.
And so your father, Paul, what did he do?
My father, Paul Gilbert, was ultimately a stand-up comic, but he started out as a young boy as an aerialist with a family circus out of Buenos Aires, and then he fell from a high wire trapeze. He fell from a trapeze when he was about 18 and couldn't fly anymore, so he joined the Army Air Corps during World War II and started working on performing and dancing and singing and learning instruments, and ultimately became a singer, a dancer, an actor. He played the French horn, he played the drums, he played the saxophone. And then later in life, before he passed away when I was about 11, in 1976, he was just doing stand-up comedy and music on the road and on cruise ships.
And tell us again your mother's name and what she did.
My mother's name is Barbara Crane Gilbert, and she is the daughter of Harry Crane and Julia Crane, my grandma and my grandpa. Her father, Harry Crane, was a comedy writer. For many, many, many years. He wrote all of the Dean Martin roasts. He created the Honeymooners. And my mother was an actress in her early life, in her 20s. She lived at the Studio Club, and she did a Jerry Lewis movie, and she did a couple of Roger Corman movies. I think they were called, one was called Sorority Girl, and the other one was called Unwed Mothers. She had a very short-lived but illustrious, nonetheless, career, and then met my father while she was apparently engaged to Don Rickles, and dumped Don Rickles and ran off and eloped with my father in Houston a few years before I was born.
Wow. And tell us a little bit about Harry Crane. What was he like?
Oh my gosh. It's hard to sum up my grandfather in less than a week, let alone, just a 5-minute or 2-minute answer. My grandfather was an extraordinarily funny, very dry man who knew everybody. I grew up with all of my grandfather's friends, with Uncle Dean and Uncle Sid and Uncle Danny, and I didn't know that any of them were famous until much later in life, but they were all people that my grandfather worked with, and they would come every year to my grandfather's birthday party at my mom's house, and I would sit and just listen to these stories about my grandfather that these, comic legends would tell about jokes, although my grandfather said he didn't write jokes because jokes were not funny, but things my grandfather would write for them. My grandfather wrote for John F. Kennedy and Frank Sinatra, and he wrote, I remember realizing actually who my grandfather was when I first went to the Smithsonian Museum. In the movie and television section, there's a poster for an Abbott and Costello movie called Lost in a Harem that I happen to have loved. I loved that movie as a little girl growing up. So when I went to the Smithsonian I think I was about 19 or 20 years old at the time, I saw this poster and I was so excited because there was this touchstone from my childhood, and it was written by my grandfather. So his name is in the Smithsonian, and that kind of, that's very fitting for my grandfather. To me, he's just Papa Harry. You know, he came over every Sunday, took us to Dupar's for pancakes. He made us laugh. We played Hide the Penny and this game that we made up that I can't even begin to explain, that my kids now play. And he was very influential on the whole family. He was, you know, the patriarch for all of us, and left a really indelible mark on us and on the industry, I think.
And do you have a sense of what he was like at work versus the man you knew?
I remember visiting Papa Harry at the Dean Martin show, and the only reason I have any recollection of this is because Uncle Dean Martin had a giant tray or platter filled with candy on the coffee table in his dressing room. And I just knew that if I was really well behaved, I could have as much candy as I wanted. And we weren't allowed to have sugar. So going to visit Papa Harry at NBC and going to Uncle Dean's room was a really big deal because that's where I got candy. I don't remember Papa Harry at work. I remember seeing him there. I don't know, he was always dashing. He was always stylish. And at work, he was just still Papa Harry. I mean, to me, it didn't, you know, I was so little then that it didn't, I don't know, it was just fun time for me.
Did he talk about the Honeymooners or Jackie Gleason or any of that stuff?
He occasionally did interviews about Jackie Gleason and about the Honeymooners. He didn't talk to us much. He didn't tell very many stories about himself, actually. Other people told me stories about my grandfather. I just remember Papa Harry being there and being very present with us. And what he did was not that much a part of who he was with the grandchildren. It may have been different for my mother and my aunt, my mother's sister. But for us, it was just, he was just Papa Harry. I didn't know how really influential he was until, really deeply influential until his memorial service, which was really, really long because everybody had so many stories. And people, you know, Gary Marshall was his assistant, I think, or started out emptying his trash cans or something as a kid. So, you know, Papa Harry had a really illustrious career and touched a lot of people's lives. But to me, he just, you know, he was Papa Harry. He had a kumquat tree in his backyard. I mean, those are the things I remember most vividly.
Did he give you advice about being in the business?
He gave me a very important piece of advice that I can't say I've always followed, but he used to always say, "Don't start," which basically meant don't start trouble, don't make a problem. And it carried through to, you know, when as a kid, when we do interviews, don't say that you don't get along with the other people on the show. I don't know why I'm making my grandfather sound like Gary Marshall right now, but that's the way, whenever we talk about Papa Harry, this is, my sister and I do this imitation of my grandfather that she will understand, most people won't. This is my grandfather. "A fish," I said, "a fish." And I have no idea what that means. But Papa Harry, don't start was key.
And did he help you at any point in your career? Do you know of, or do you think he helped you?
I think he had a hand, not necessarily in getting me cast in Little House on the Prairie, but I know that he made a couple of phone calls because it was an NBC show, and I know he called Michael Landon, who I didn't at the time, I had no idea who he was, but I know that my grandfather called Michael Landon and said, "So the kid's coming in, and you got to take care of the kid." And I have framed the pilot episode of Little House on the Prairie, and the scene numbers for the audition are typed on a slip of paper from my grandfather's typewriter. So somehow he knew what the scene numbers were, and I can tell, I know his typewriter, and that's clipped on the outside of the script.
That's interesting. So moving on to other family members, do you have siblings, and what are their names?
I have a sister, Sarah Gilbert, a younger sister, and a younger brother, Jonathan Gilbert.
Great. And where did you grow up?
I grew up first in Studio City, California, and then until I was 9, and then we moved to Encino, California. But I'm a Valley girl. Cool. I'm still in the Valley.
And did you have hobbies growing up?
I did have hobbies growing up. I danced. I started taking ballet, I think probably when I was about 2, and I loved dancing. I loved to go horseback riding, which basically at that age meant going to a place called Ponyland, where the Beverly Center in LA is now. There was 2 places. There was Kittyland, which was a little miniature amusement park, and next door was Ponyland, where they had little Shetland ponies, and they had rings that started out big and got smaller and smaller, and the further out you got, the slower I think the horses went. And then as you got in, they'd go faster, they'd trot, and then they'd gallop. And I'd dress up in cowgirl clothes and go ride horses at Ponyland. Was one of my favorite things to do. I collected dolls. I had a lot of dolls. I had baby dolls. I took a baby everywhere I went. Did a lot of drawing, listened to a lot of records, a lot of music. My friend Amy Sherman, who's now Amy Sherman Palladino, a very influential producer, writer in her own right, she and I used to play all the time, and we would play records of Snow White and Cinderella and Bambi, and we would act them out in my bedroom when I was a little girl.
That's cool. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a brain surgeon when I grew up. I was very determined that I was going to be some sort of doctor. I didn't really, as a child, what I did was not really a job. It was just something extra, Even though it was a lot of work, it didn't really occur to me that, people could make acting a profession. It sort of seemed ludicrous.
So what was the shift that made you decide to make it a profession?
I was applying pre-med to colleges in my senior year of high school, and I actually sat down and I was talking with my grandfather and my mother. And I think it was my grandfather who said, some people actually make this thing a profession. And it didn't really occur to me as we talked things out. I had about 15 more years of school ahead of me if I really wanted to become a doctor and then study my specialty and then establish a practice before I could even become remotely successful doing that. And I already had 15 or more years into this career. And I just sort of looked at them dumbfounded and went, oh, right. And so, I played a doctor on television, but I am not actually a physician.
That's good to know.
Don't ask me for any
I will not
diagnosis.
ask you for any medical
I
advice.
don't. Advil. That's my answer for everything.
That's a good answer.
Advil.
I live by that. Did you watch a lot of television growing up?
I did watch a lot of television. I wouldn't say a lot compared to most kids, because I was also encouraged to read. Which was a really good thing. But I watched Batman, was a huge show for me. The Adam West Batman was very influential on me. I thought for sure I was going to grow up and marry Batman and be a brain surgeon. It's funny how things don't turn out the way you plan. Batman, The Brady Bunch, The Partridge Family, Medical Center, of course. Emergency, of course. Anything that had, a medicine or surgery or something, some sort of high drama in it, I liked. And that was kind of the extent of it in childhood. A lot of cartoons, Shirley Temple movies, The Little Rascals, and The Three Stooges.
That's a good list. So, obviously you started acting when you were very young. So how did your family get you into that?
The legend tells of a tale of a small girl. I was about 2, I think, and a friend of my mom's suggested to her that I was cute enough, apparently, that I should do commercials and get an agent. And I guess my mother took me to meet with an agent, and then the agent sent me out on my first commercial audition, which I landed immediately for Carter's Baby Clothes. I don't think it required much of me. I have no memory of it at all. But the only memory I have are the ones that I've been told that, I apparently, this was in the 60s. This was 66, 67, somewhere around there. And the director and the clients and all the people were all sitting around on the floor with long beards and interviewing little babies. And apparently I walked in the room and climbed right on the director's lap and threw my arms around his neck and kissed him and began flirting shamelessly. And my mother was mortified because she thought they would think that she told me to do that. But apparently it was by my own volition. So I knew what I was doing, I think, back then. I have childhood friends who swear that I knew exactly what I was doing. So it beats me, maybe. I don't know.
And you did a lot of commercials after that. Do you remember any of them?
I do. I remember some. I don't remember all, obviously. I did some ridiculous number, 40-something commercials or something like that. Crest. I remember the Crest toothpaste. During the daddy, I only have one cavity years. I was one of those kids. McDonald's, because we got to eat McDonald's. Butterball turkey, because we got to pretend it was Christmas. And the one that I remember the most is the Raleigh candy bar commercial. I would love to say it's because we got a case of Raleigh candy bars, which we did, but it's I lied shamelessly going into the audition that I could ride a two-wheeler bike. Because the commercial was about a girl and her dad riding bicycles in the park and then stopping for a Raleigh candy bar. And I couldn't ride a two-wheeler bike, and I got the job. And on the first day of work, I had to confess that I couldn't ride a two-wheeler, and it was very traumatic, and I spent a lot of time just sobbing. I'm sorry, I didn't know. I'm sorry I lied, but I really wanted the candy bars. And they rewrote the commercial on the fly, and they turned it into a father teaching his daughter how to ride a two-wheeler bike, and I actually learned how to ride a two-wheeler that day. So I learned a lot of valuable lessons. I learned that you can get away with lying if you're cute, and you get candy bars, and you get to learn how to ride a bike. And later on, I realized I also got paid. So that was kind of an unusual day, but I was terrified. I do remember feeling terrified at confessing that I couldn't ride a bike.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
Did you have an audition strategy at that point when you went into auditions? Was there?
I didn't really have, I just, whatever it was the best thing I ever had. You know, if it was the deodorant, my dad used that deodorant. I mean, I would just make stuff up all the time. It's my favorite mustard. Those are my favorite jeans. Whatever it was. I didn't understand. My brother was more reluctant than I was, and he was much more shy. I didn't get that. I didn't understand why he didn't go in and, just tell them what they wanted to hear and smile and sparkle. No one told me to do that. That was just me, I would sit and do homework, and then they'd call me in, and I'd lie. It was terrible.
So what was your first non-commercial TV role?
My first non-commercial TV role was an episode of Gunsmoke. And I played, I think, what was the little girl's name? Little Miss something or other. And I can't remember the name of the character. Little Miss Scraps or Little Miss something. She was a daughter of a poor father, and Sheriff Dillon was coming to arrest him, and I had to cry with my mama for my dad. That's all I remember. But I remember the actress, Catherine Hellmond, I think it was. Catherine Hellmond. She did this really incredible thing that I'd never seen an actor do before, because all I'd done is commercials. So, there really wasn't much of an opportunity to dig deeper than, I love this mustard, as I said before. She kind of curled up in the corner, and she lifted all of her Gunsmoke wardrobe-y skirts up, and she squatted down in the corner before the scene, and she was just kind of rocking back and forth and thinking really hard, and I didn't go anywhere near, because I didn't want to get in trouble, and I thought it was just fascinating what she was doing, and what she was really doing was preparing for the scene and really focusing on what was ahead of her, because she had to get somewhat hysterical that, her husband had been taken away, or that, I don't even remember the circumstances. But that was the first time I ever saw an actor prepare for something, and it was really important. It felt important even then, and I think I was 7, maybe, or younger. So I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, so that's how you do this. And I still sometimes, on days where I have really tough things to do and I have to stay focused, I will crouch down in a corner until they're ready for me. Because I don't like to be too far away, because I don't like to remove myself from what I'm doing entirely. But I don't like to get distracted by all the noise and buzz going on the set around me. So I just kind of crouch down in a corner.
Oh, that's interesting. And then you were on Emergency. Do you have memories of that?
So remember being on Emergency for so many reasons. First of all, it was one of my favorite shows. And if I was going to marry Batman, I was going to marry one of those two guys. Either Kevin Teague or Randy Mantooth. And Teague, Kevin Teague. Anyway, I had to cry again because my father was being taken away. Hi, there's a theme. And it was paralleling my life, too. And I had to run into the arms of Kevin and cry for my daddy. And I really thought it was like the most, I crouched down in the corner, I prepared, and I remember it being, wow, everyone was really blown away that this kid was that good. And just a couple years ago, I rented it from Netflix. Oh my God. I was awful. I'm very critical of child actors, and I have no right to be because I was really a terrible child actor at first. No. Trust me, you have to see this episode of Emergency. It is, I like how I call it Emergency, like the medicine that you drink now. This episode of Emergency is so bad. It's just stinky. Bad acting, overacting. But I obviously at that time gave me the confidence to step into whatever was coming next, and there was really big stuff coming. So
absolutely. And before we get into that, were there any other shows or appearances during that time?
I did a pilot for a series with Brian Dennehy and Mr. McEachin. James McEachin, who is a brilliant actor, still around now. African-American actor, lived down the street from us. And so I grew up knowing him as Mr. McEachin. And I still, when I see him places, I can't call him by his first name. And I'm, almost 47 years old. It's just ridiculous. But it was Brian Dennehy and Mr. McEachin and me. And the series the pilot was called Tenafly. And I think it was a cop something or other. I was Brian Dennehy's daughter. We shot the pilot and that was it. I don't think it ever became a series. And I don't really have any memories of that other than vague memories of Mr. McEachin, who I met later when we moved up the street from him after filming that.
And did you ever appear in any of your grandfather's?
Oh my gosh, I'm so not remembering stuff. My first actual television appearance wasn't a commercial or a dramatic role, was in Dean Martin's Christmas special. The Gold Diggers were on it, and Dennis Weaver, who I worked with later, played my father-in-law in a movie that I did about 13 years ago, and whose counsel I sought when I was SAG president, because he had been as well. But Dennis Weaver had to come and sing a song with a group of kids, and it was all the kids of people who were on the show. Dom DeLuise's son was there, and I was there because Papa Harry was producing it. And we had to sing this song where we had to blow whistles and then hit tambourines. And different kids had different instruments. And Dennis Weaver would point, and then we'd play. And the whistles were first, and then the horns, and then the tambourines. And he came out, and we were taping, and he said, and so kids, I'm going to sing this song, and when I do blah, 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 then you play the tambourine. And I chimed in and went, no, the whistle. I had a lisp. The whistle first. My family does this to me all the time, too. When I get bossy, my kids will go, whistle first. No, the whistle first. And he looked at me and went, right, the whistle's first. And I went, right. So I was bossy and lying, and there you go. I was a great kid. People loved me. Actually, I have that on DVD, and it's very funny because you can see the precociousness definitely there, and there's definitely shades of what's to come. You can see a little president sitting there. There's a little president there. No, the whistle first. Yeah.
That's great. We're going to go into Little House and talk about that, and then we'll circle back around to some other things that you did during that time, but we'll focus
what else
on
did I do?
good
The
stuff.
time I lit the house on fire?
Remember that, Amy?
Oh,
We'll
the
get to
Emmy.
that. Yeah.
That's after. That was later.
Sure. So in 1974, you were cast as Laura Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie.
Wow.
How did that come about?
I got cast in Little House on the Prairie through the regular old audition process, unless my grandfather had something special to do with it. But I remember there being lots of girls, and all the usual suspects too. Christy McNichol was there, and Dawn Lynn, who was Leif Garrett's little sister, who worked all the time, was there, and it was the same kind of group that we're all called in for the same things all the time. And I remember there was a buzz in the house about it, but I knew Little House on the Prairie. I knew Little House in the Big Woods and Little House on the Prairie were the only two books I'd read, so I certainly knew who Laura Ingalls Wilder was. I heard little snippets of words like pilot again and series and Michael Landon. That was the first time I heard the name of Michael Landon. No clue who that was. I never watched Bonanza. I'm a girl. Although apparently a lot of girls watch Bonanza and really like Little Joe. He was a good-looking guy, but he's like a dad. I'm glad he was handsome though. So I went in just like I would for anything else. It was the same old, same old. Hair and pigtails, whatever dirt was on, stayed on. I was drawing or doing homework in the waiting room before I went in, read the scenes. Got called back. And I was actually told this story recently. I don't remember this, but I was told the story by Kent McCrae, who was our executive producer. One of the sessions I went in, and it was him and the casting director. This was before we got to actually meet Michael Landon. And I came in and read again, and the casting director was trying to make small talk and sort of get a feel for my personality. And as I was walking out the door, the casting person stopped me, the NBC casting person stopped me and said, "How tall are you?" And I turned around and went, "This tall." And that's when he knew that Michael was going to love me. I went in and met Michael Landon, and there was a lot of, even Papa Harry called and said, "So you're going to go meet Michael Landon. Now you better behave," and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, this is Michael Landon. Okay. And I remember walking in the room, and I remember thinking, wow. I mean, that's what a star. He looked like a star. And he was so at ease and kind of, at the same time, looking back, he was very tense too, and focused, but really fun and funny and reading with me, and we were talking, and he wasn't talking to me like I was 9. He was talking to me like I was, his contemporary, working with him, but at the same time, he was still treating me like, age appropriately. And he was making me laugh, and he had really great hair. I remember he had the coolest hair. None of the grown-ups in my world had that kind of hair. All the grown-ups in my world were like, Daddy was a nightclub dude with the, very clean-cut hair, and the loosest Daddy got was an untied bow tie. He was like cool, and he had really great aviator sunglasses that were clear yellow, and he just was awesome. And that, I guess, led to the screen test. And I went in, and I remember doing the screen test. There was 2 scenes. There was one scene that I did with Melissa Sue Anderson about untying the dog, and then there was another scene I did with Mike about him not being sorry that Jack drowned and looking up at the stars. And I remember clear as anything the 2 of us doing this scene and him looking at me with tears in his eyes, and it instantly, I choke up just talking about it, instantly bringing me to tears, which made it was just so easy. And that was, I didn't know at the time, was the beginning of what we would be able to do to each other on camera for all those years. There was some sort of symbiotic connection there. I found out later, many, many years later, that when it came time to take the screen test to the network, he only took mine because he knew. He didn't give them any other choices. He just said, that's Laura, that's Half Pint.
That's amazing. What were you told about the character when you went into audition? Did they give you guidance, or?
I don't remember anybody telling me anything other than... Nope, I didn't get a lot of direction. I didn't have one of those moms who worked with me a lot and told me what to do. Everybody sort of trusted my instincts, which were great. I knew everything I needed to know because I'd read those books, so I, sort of went back to them and did the 9-year-old version of research. But mostly for me, at that age, acting was about imagining being myself in those clothes, in that place, at that time, under those circumstances. And I had a really vivid imagination. I had a really crazy imaginary life, terrified of the dark. I was sure that there were, I could see the things in the bed, under the bed, in the wallpaper. I had roses on my wall in my bedroom, and I could see the faces. And it not necessarily always scary, but I was very imaginative, and I think that really helped. The only specific thing I remember being told was when it came time to shoot, I had to do all the narration. And so my mom took me to her acting coach, Jeff Corey, who later would be incredibly influential in my career. And he was very sweet. Even then, he was a sweet old guy, hippie guy in Malibu with overalls. And he gave me kefir, not Sutherland, kefir, a yogurt drink, because I had kind of a sore throat, and the acidophilus would make, I'd never heard of that before. I mean, he was like this really cool guy, and he had a vegetable garden. And the only thing he told me was for the narrations to imagine what it would be like to be 100 years old telling those stories to my grandchildren. So even though I had the tiniest little squeaky voice in the world, you can almost, when you hear the narration over the pilot, especially episode of Little House on the Prairie, you can kind of hear, because I imagine rocking back and forth in a rocking chair, and I kind of graveled out my voice a little bit. I thought that was a really interesting note to give a 9-year-old. So beyond that, it was just hit your mark, stand over here, go over there, and navigate my way through the shooting of the pilot, which was like Wonderland for me. It was. There were babies and there were animals. We had deer on the set and rabbits and the dog Jack, and Karen Grassley, who was this beautiful, again, no one like her in my family, blonde and tall and classically trained. I'd never been around people like this. And we were away, and there was snow, and it was just, and we ate stew, and I tasted molasses. I mean, I had button-up shoes, my boots. I had a button hook in my dressing room to button up my shoes. It was the greatest dress-up ever. Better than anything Amy Sherman and I did in my bedroom. This was supreme.
Well, we definitely want to talk about the costumes and wardrobe and everything, but before we get there, can you just describe the premise of the show for people?
Little House on the Prairie is based on the series of books by Laura Ingalls Wilder that begin with Little Town on the Prairie or Little House in the Big Woods and end with, I'm looking at them on my shelf right now, These Happy Golden Years. And it's the story of Laura Ingalls Wilder's childhood and young adulthood settling the western part of the United States. At that time, the West was Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota was as far west as they got, and ultimately ended up in De Smet, South Dakota. And the pilot was the first book, Little House on the Prairie, about when the Ingalls first moved from the big woods of Wisconsin to Kansas into Indian Territory and built a cabin there. And ultimately, Charles Ingalls, or Pa, lost the land because they redrew the boundaries and they had to move again. But it's the story of the beginning of America. And it's I think, extraordinarily timeless because it serves as a constant reminder of not only where we came from, but how much we are capable of. I mean, these people had nothing. They had nothing. They all slept in one room. They had a dirt floor. They had fires and locusts and Indians and now Native Americans, but they were Indians then, and they were brutal and horrible winters and wolves and snakes and no doctors. And these people had the courage to settle our country and rely on one another, rely on one another in a way that we don't now. And I think it is, especially during the hardest times in the world, but in our nation as a whole, that it's really important to remember where we came from and how we started with nothing and we're able to persevere that. We can do that, we can do this, which makes it no surprise why Little House on the Prairie was such a huge hit during the nation's first recession. We were a reminder of what was possible, of what Americans are capable of. And then there was also, the sort of sensibilities of the show about community and love and family and respect and honesty and faith. I think those are things that we're all searching for constantly in some way or another in our lives. And so that show just kind of boiled it all down. And I know I hear from women all the time that around my age that grew up wanting to be either Laura Ingalls from the books or Laura Ingalls from the television series. So did I. I got to play her, but I really wanted that life.
Well, describe Laura Ingalls. Who was she?
Oh my gosh, Laura Ingalls was this very. She was a trailblazer in so many ways. Even as a girl, she took no for an answer because she didn't want to get into trouble. But she was very adventurous, very feisty, very inquisitive. She wanted to know all about the Indians and why they were the way they were, and what the different tribes meant, and what the different animals did, and how things happened, and why was it fair to take their land away. And she grew up with a very interesting, if you read the books, there's undertones in there of what these people were really like. It's children's literature, but when you read it again as an adult, you see that Laura's ma was a little bit of a racist, and Pa was an absolute sympathizer with this incredible wanderlust. Ma just wanted to stay in one place. She didn't want to see anyone who wasn't white. She didn't like anybody else. Waspy white people. That was it. And she was terrified, which also is very interesting now because we're constantly faced with challenges of dealing with people who are different than us and trying to navigate around those sort of cellular level fears of the unknown. But Laura was just freedom personified, even as a young woman and an adult. And she raised her daughter, created the Libertarian Party, was one of the founders of the Libertarian Party, Rose Wilder Lane. So she was in many, many ways a trailblazer. No, by no way a feminist the way we define it now, but definitely she was a tomboy. She was always in trouble. She was always, doing things she shouldn't. She liked to fish. She could bait her own hook. She was I think the son that Charles Ingalls never had.
And what were her greatest strengths, and what were her biggest weaknesses, do you think?
I think, well, they're sort of one and the same. Her mischievousness was a strength and a weakness because it got her into trouble. And her pluckiness was a great strength. And she was so determined, almost to the point of being stubborn, which I can definitely relate to and could back then. The whistle first. She wore her heart on her sleeve, especially the way she was written in the screenplays and the way I got to play her. When she was sad, you knew it. After, in the pilot episode when the dog gets swept down the river and everybody thinks the dog is dead, and Pa kind of closes off because he doesn't want to feel anything about it. And there's that scene where the wagon's going along and I'm, as Laura, walking next to it with my sunbonnet, just stomping my feet in anger and no refusing to get in the wagon or pull up my bonnet. It's just a real indication of how incredibly independent and yet very loving. She is.
And this, you touched on this a little bit, but how were you like her?
Oh boy. Well, I mean, you go through my medical chart so you can find out how I was like her. I've broken more bones, climbed trees, fallen out of them as an adult. I broke my back last year. I am stubborn and feisty and plucky, and as a child I certainly was incredibly adventurous. A lot of time was spent on that set going, "Where's Half Pint?" which was my nickname. And the reason that was my nickname was there was 2 Melissas on the set, and she was already Missy, which was fine because I hate the nickname Missy for Melissa. It always bothered me. So when Michael Landon said, "What nickname do you want?" I actually said, "How about Moisha?" And he went, What's Moisha? I said, "I don't know. I heard the name. I think it's really neat." And he said, "You know what? I think we're just going to call you Half Pint, not Moisha." Little did I know Moisha was, the name of an old moil. Anyway, that's, I think I'm still very open and wide-eyed and willing to give people a first and second, maybe even a third chance. But that's it. Then I'm going to stomp around with my bonnet hanging down my back and it's over.
So how was Laura unlike Nellie and Mary?
Oh, Laura, so not prissy. Mary was, prissy and a scholar. Laura was not a scholar, which is interesting because she became the published author. And Nellie was just a brat, nightmare, spoiled, rotten brat. On the television series especially. I mean, horrid, like the bad seed almost, that bad. Laura was the exact antithesis, and they hired the perfect foil, I think, for me with Alison Arngrim, who is still one of my dearest friends. This is probably too much information, but bless her heart, she drove me last Monday for my colonoscopy. That's how close we are. That's something you only let a close girlfriend do. She just had this, and she was great off camera, but she had this seething, horrible, and they wrote her so awfully with the ruffles, and then she had the curls and the bows, and I was just, my braids were there, but they were always messy. There was always something torn. My dresses were too short. I was always playing with frogs, and we were actually like that there. Allison was a great friend to play with, but I was much more into, mud pies and Melissa Sue Anderson had nothing to do with either of us, ever. She just looked at us like we were aliens. There was no love lost there. And I don't have to die for you guys to let that be said or heard. Both books came out. It's pretty clear.
Fair enough. Speaking of books, so how closely did the Little House TV series reflect the storylines of the Laura Ingalls Wilder books?
Well, there's 9 Laura Ingalls Wilder books, and there were, I don't remember how many hundreds of episodes of the television series. So the major milestones in the books were definitely followed. The marriages, the deaths, the births, the major characters. But at some point, I think the producers had to use a little dramatic license, and they brought in a lot of characters that didn't really exist in the books or in the real story, like the adopted brother Albert or the adopted brother James and his sister Cassandra, Big John Garvey. There were licenses taken. But the heart of what the books were about, again, that family and community and love and truth and faith, was all still there, no matter what was going on. I mean, Laura Ingalls Wilder never had an adopted half-brother who became addicted to morphine. But in the TV series, we did it. But also we were reflecting, the show was sort of reflecting what was going on in the country at the same time. So we had to be somewhat topical.
Were there things that weren't covered from the books that you, at the time, were aware of that you wish had been covered, or things that were covered that you wish hadn't been covered?
There was only one thing in the books that I really, really loved, one passage in particular. about, and we didn't do this on the show, about the pig that they slaughtered and how the girls played catch with the pig's stomach, or bladder, pig's bladder. Pa washed it out, and then he blew it up with air and tied a knot in it, and the girls played catch with it. We didn't actually get to do that. I thought that was going to be really fun, but we didn't. I do have one really good story about the pilot that I did not find out until years later. Michael Landon told me the story at his daughter Leslie's wedding. It was just before he was diagnosed, so it was a few months before he got sick, which is 20 years ago. And we were standing outside the church getting ready for the wedding, and he said, I have to confess something to you. He said, you remember in the pilot episode we did the one scene that's not in, where you had to walk in with the rabbits that I had shot and say, look what Pa got, and then set them down on the table? And I said, yeah, I remember. That was amazing. And he said, yes. He said, it was amazing because you were holding all of these rabbits, and I told you that they were hypnotized. And I said, that's right. And they were all hypnotized. And then he said, yes. And he said, and then you put them on the table. You said your line. And they all fell on the ground. You missed the table, and they went thunk. He said, and you looked up at me, and you said, boy, they sure do sleep tight, don't they? And I said, yeah, I remember that. He said, half pint, they were dead. They were not hypnotized. But we knew you wouldn't carry them if we told you they were dead rabbits. And I'm so glad he waited until I was older to tell me that story. I don't think I could have handled it. I wouldn't have done it. But yeah, they told me they were hypnotized, and I believed them.
It's better that way. Speaking of Leslie, it actually reminded me of something I wanted to ask you earlier, which is how you found out that you got the part on the show.
Well, the traditional way you find out you get a role is your agent gets a call, and then if you're a child, the agent calls your mom, and then the trickles down, and eventually mom tells you. I went to school with the Landon kids. I didn't know that, at Buckley. I went to the Buckley school. And I was standing by my locker one day, and this really tall girl came up to me, and she said, you're Melissa, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And she said, I'm Leslie Landon. My dad says you're going to be half pint. And I ran away. I screamed, and I ran to the office to call home, and I called my mom. She had no idea. She called my agent, and my agent hadn't even gotten a call from the network yet. So my agent called the network, and the network confirmed it. And then I, of course, got picked up because I was beside myself that I was going to play Laura, and Leslie got punished. I don't know what her punishment was, but I guess you're really not supposed to do that. So I think it's sweet, though. And that was the beginning of our friendship, which is now almost 36 years old.
Amazing.
Michael was a very powerful personality. He was a force to be reckoned with, and he was a perfectionist, and he knew what he wanted, and he knew how he wanted to do it, and no one was going to stop him. And he had the right vision, clearly. It's one of the most successful shows in the history of television, and it's all pretty much because of him.
In what way?
He was the one with the vision, and he was the one who knew what the show needed to be, and he wrote every other episode, he directed every other episode, and he starred in it. It consumed him. He was involved in every aspect of it. He was great to work for that way. He knew what everyone's job was on the crew, could do everyone's job on the crew, therefore had respect for everyone on the crew, and created a real family out of the entire cast and crew. We flew together and chartered planes. Everybody had a ticket for their spouses when we went on location. It was a completely different way of doing television than I've ever done since.
And what was your relationship like with him when the show started? And how did it evolve over the
Oh my gosh, my relationship with Michael Landon when we started the show was really close. The sun rose and set by him. His approval was just completely validating and exciting. I never really was on the receiving end of his scorn, certainly not in the beginning. I only got in trouble with him once, a few years into the show, where I didn't know my lines for one scene. But that ended pretty quickly.
What happened?
I couldn't remember my lines because I hadn't studied them and couldn't remember them. And he stopped everything. And he came over to me very quietly, very privately, and he said, you don't know your lines, do you? And I immediately, like the Raleigh candy bar commercial, started sobbing. No, I didn't learn it. And he went, shut, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Everybody take 10. You, come with me. And he got a script, and we walked away, and he took me in. We drilled lines back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And he said, you got it now? And I said, yes, I absolutely do. He said, okay, let's go. And I took a couple steps, and he grabbed my arm, and he spun me around, and he got really close to me, and he said, that's never going to happen again, is it? I said, nope. And I have never walked into a work situation unprepared since.
And how did that relationship change as you grew older and he became kind of more disillusioned, it seemed, with the series?
I think he became disillusioned with the series at the same time that his life started to take some turns. His marriage fell apart, and he left his wife for one of the women who worked on the crew of Little House. And, we were all there, and we all kind of saw it coming. And for me, it was particularly difficult because we were friends socially. His family and my family did everything together. We vacationed together. We spent New Year's Eve together. I spent the night at their house. They spent the night at my house. And my mom was really close with his wife at that time, Lynn. And so, I was sort of watching this on-set romance bloom, and I would come home and say something to my mother, and she'd say, you're crazy. He just bought Auntie Lynn the most beautiful ruby bracelet, and they were dancing at a thing, and they were dancing to their song Moon River, and there's nothing going on. And then I go to work, and I sort of see him off in the corner, and I think he became disillusioned with the show. I think he became disillusioned with so much, was ready to start this life over again. And I was, family splits up, everybody picks sides. And one of my best friends and my high school sweetheart was his son. So I stayed closer to them. And he really pulled away from all of us. And that's when the show changed. This was much later on, and that's ultimately when he left as an actor. And they were ready to sort of do an overhaul on the show anyway, and that's when it became Little House, A New Beginning. And I got moved up from number 3 to number 1 on the call sheet.
Interesting. So how did that transition affect you, him leaving and moving into that position?
I don't remember feeling pressured. I know that everybody thought, we'll see what we can get out of the kids, meaning me and Dean Butler, who was playing Almanzo. All I remember is one day in the first episode, he was saying goodbye. He was leaving. And they had me at number 1 on the call sheet, and then they had him down at like number 17. And I came into the makeup trailer, and I saw it for the first time, and I said, oh my God, this is so great. And he walked up behind me, and he took the call sheet, and he said, yes, and if you don't do well at this, and he flipped it, he said, I'm moving up here, and you're moving down there. And I thought, okay, all right, bring it. Challenge me. The Laura Ingalls in me came out and just went, I can do this. And I did for like a season and a half, but by that time, we were rehashing old stories and just, new faces. We brought in the new Laura with Shannon Doherty with the pigtails, and then there was a new Nellie with Nancy, and we jumped so many sharks at that point. We jumped like 12 sharks in one episode. When we had the tornado, the diphtheria, gave birth to the baby, Almanzo had a stroke, taught himself how to walk, and we rebuilt our house. What? In one episode. That's a lot of drama.
A lot. And good TV. So how did Laura's style change over the course? Talk about what Laura wore and how she looked in her makeup before, when you started the show, and what Laura was about by the end in terms of her personal style.
Well, Laura was much more of a tomboy, much more, she certainly didn't care about what she wore, and I think the dresses sort of reflected that. They were calicos, which was the most practical fabric for the girls, and they were very juvenile in that way. And then as my character got older, the waistline went from here down to my waist, and the skirts got longer, and then my hair came down, and then my hair went up in a bun. It was sort of this, you knew the transition by watching Melissa Sue went through it before me as Mary, and then Allison did it as Nellie. The hair came down, and then the hair goes up in the bun, and then you become a teacher. That's how you know. And then the next thing you know, you're married, and you have a husband, and you're going to have a baby. But if you're me, you're also 16 years old and a virgin who's never kissed a boy, which made for some awkward scenes with the husband, poor Dean Butler. That all changed when I actually fell in love off camera and got kissed and then some for the first time. But Laura, I think her style evolved, and at one point, we put my hair up and we had this really bad I called it, it's a terrible, terrible thing. It's a terrible joke now, knowing how many people have been through this, but I called it the tumor head hair. That was just this big, like Bride of Frankenstein over-teased poof, and we changed it and made it like a nice little bun and tied it up with some braids, and that was it. And she became a little more, Laura became a little more proper, but still would kick up her heels and dance, still running. I never walked anywhere on that show. I really did. I ran everywhere. Even when my character was pregnant, I ran. Got a lot of exercise out there. So that's basically how, the styles changed. I went from a sunbonnet to a little straw hat with flowers on it, and I got to wear earrings, which was a big deal because really only Mrs. Olson wore earrings on the show, and she was really rich. So I got earrings, and then they moved us into a boarding house, which never happened in the real story. But we ran a boarding house with this British guy, and Mr. Edwards was there. It got kind of silly towards the end.